Good evening, everyone, or good morning, wherever you are in the world. My name is Joyce Boro. I'm a board member at Indigo Theater, and I'm also the chair of the Département de littératures et langues du monde, Department of Literatures and Languages of the World at Université de Montréal. And on behalf of both of those organizations, it's my pleasure to welcome you to our way forward. My role this evening is I think, really to listen and learn rather than to speak. But before we get started, I do need to do a little bit of talking, so bear with me. Our way forward is a hybrid duet of events. We have this digital roundtable discussion and then an evening of live staged readings that will focus on Indigenous storytelling, theater practices, and works by several Indigenous playwrights about systemic racism and the history and lasting impact of residential schools in Canada. The evening of stage readings is curated and directed by Yvette Nolan, and it will take place on May 20th at 7:30 at the National Theatre School of Canada in real live people in the room together. And there's more information about that on the Indigo Theatre website. We'd like to acknowledge that Indigo Theatre and Université de Montréal are located on the unceded Indigenous lands of Jojoge, Montreal, which is historically known as a gathering place of creativity, community, storytelling, and culture for First Nations and Indigenous communities, including but not limited to the Ganegahaga of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, Huron-Wendat, Abenaki, and Anishinaabe. We acknowledge and honor these nations' relationship to and status as First Peoples on the lands and waters of the island of Montreal and surrounding areas. We respect the past, present, and future of Indigenous peoples in Montreal, and we stand in solidarity with the Indigenous members of our community. We also ask that you pause to consider your relationship to the Indigenous peoples, lands, and waters on which you are currently placed. It's with deep respect to all of these relationships that we invite you to join us this evening. I'd also like to acknowledge and express my gratitude to the wonderful Micheline Chevrier, the Executive and Artistic Director of Indigo Theatre, and to the equally wonderful Yvette Nolan, without whom this event would not have happened. To the wonderful team at Indigo, especially Alessandra and Dana Ray, who expertly dealt with all of the logistics, thank you. And to our three fantastic panelists, Yvette Nolan, Phelan Johnson, and Keith Barker, who have generously agreed to participate in this conversation. I feel awed and honored to have the opportunity to listen and to learn from them, and to be able to also offer this space where they can share their knowledge and experiences with all of us. If over the course of this discussion you want to ask the panelists a question, you can write it in the chat box, and we'll do our best to include it if we can. And it's now my pleasure to introduce these three accomplished people. Keith Barker is a member of the Métis Nation of Ontario. He's a playwright, actor, and director from Northwestern Ontario. Keith is the incoming director of the Forster Bernstein New Play Development Program at the Stratford Festival, yay, and the outgoing artistic director at Native Earth Performing Arts in Toronto. He's the winner of the Dora Mavor Award and the Playwrights Guild Carol Bolt Award for Best New Play. Keith was a finalist for the Governor General's Award for English Drama in 2018 for his play, This Is How We Got Here. He received a Saskatchewan Area Theatre Award for Excellence in Playwriting for his play, The Hours That Remain, as well as a Yukon Arts Award for Best Art for Social Change. His new short Zoom play, In a Little Plastic Bag in a Tiny Little Jar on a Mantle in the House, is part of the Stratford Festival's viral transmission series found on the Stratfest at Home site. His audio play, Every Minute of Every Day, premiered as part of Factory Theatre's You Can't Get There From Here podcast play series in March 2021. Our second panelist, Phelan Johnson. Phelan Johnson is Mohawk and Tuscarora Bear Clan from Six Nations Grand River Territory. She's a writer, podcaster, and radio host. Her plays include Salt Baby, Two Indians, and Nipperwash, for which she received a Dora nomination. Her writing has been featured in Brick, the Canadian Theatre Review, and Granta Magazine. She's also written for Urban Native Girl and Merchants of the Wild on APTN and the 2020 Inspire Awards on CBC. She was named One to Watch in 2020 by Maclean's Magazine, and is a 2021 Governor General finalist of the drama category. Family co-host of Secret Life of Canada on CBC podcasts with Leah Simone Bowen. I wasn't quoting because I didn't think she was one to watch. I'm just.
Are you kidding? Well, I mean, my dad always makes the joke, one to watch for what?
One to watch for everything,
Exactly. You don't know
and
what
to listen
to.
Yvette Nolan Algonquin is a playwright, director, and dramaturge. Her works include the plays The Unplugging, the dance opera Bearing, and the libretto Shana Wadit. She created with Joel Barenbaum and Lancelot Knight the verbatim play Reasonable Doubt about relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities in Saskatchewan. Currently, she is working on Tabwewen with Maria Campbell and Marilyn Quatras, on Namwayut with Marion Newman, Ian Cussin, and Pamela Atriwala, and on Sophia with Tim Brady. From 2003 to 2011, she served as artistic director of Native Earth Performing Arts. Her book, Medicine Shows, about Indigenous performance in Canada was published by Playwrights Canada Press in 2015, and Performing Indigeneity, which she co-edited with Rick Knowles in 2016. She's a company dramaturge for Some Theatre in Saskatoon, and she's currently pursuing her master's in public policy at Johnson Shoyama Graduate School of Public Policy. Welcome to the three of you. Just to start, can I ask each of you to introduce yourselves briefly and say hi and maybe tell a joke? No, don't tell another joke. Just say hi to everyone. I don't know who wants to start.
I feel like Keith has to go first.
Keith should go first.
Yeah.
Alphabetical order.
Wow.
Keith is first. Say hi.
Keith's first.
Hi, everybody. My name is Keith. My pronouns are he, him. As mentioned, I'm a member of the Métis Nation of Ontario. I am also a mix of French, English, and Scottish. My maternal grandfather is from Mattawa, but I was raised mostly in Treaty 3 territory, which is like the Kenora, Ontario area, but also Thunder Bay, which is the Robinson Superior Treaty territory. Just would love to take this moment. I learned this from Wesley Enoch, is to acknowledge all the elders on this call, just in the room and in this space right now. So yeah. And I come to you from Tikaronto, which is the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, the Mississaugas of the Credit, but also the Haudenosaunee and Wendat peoples. It's Treaty 13 territory. And excited to be here and excited to be in a room with all of you. So I'll pass it off to Phelan.
Hello. Phelan Johnson. You heard all of that other stuff about me. I'm joining you from Montreal, Dodage, which is a new place to me. I've only been here for just over a year, but I love it here. It's been great to be on this territory. I am Mohawk and Tuscarora, but not from this area. My Mohawk does not come from this area, so it kind of feels like I'm near cousins, which is nice. I'm really grateful that Imago put this panel together. It's really nice to be in this virtual space with two, Yvette and Keith, and I go back quite a ways. And I think when I was talking to Joyce about some of my memories of working with Keith for the first time was like me snotting on Keith at the National Arts Center during the adaptation of Julius Caesar, Death of a Chief that Yvette directed. So there's we're tied together, by not just snot, other things too.
But that's a deeper bond for sure.
I think so.
Thanks, Phelan.
Hi all. Yeah, nice to be in the room with you guys. I am Yvette. I'm beaming in from Saskatoon, which is Treaty 6 territory. It's Cree territory out here. I'm a guest out here because my people are actually from Gitaganzi B. Algonquin First Nation in Quebec, just up the road from Montreal, where you guys are. But my mom left her community when she was 7 to go to the sanatorium because she had TB, and from there to residential school, and from there to another residential school. And she met and married my father out of that residential school. He was her math teacher. And so she never really got back to her community. I mean, we went in summers and stuff. But I have lived all over this grand land, just never in that place where my mother came from. Have not lived actually in Quebec. But I've lived in the Yukon, I've lived in Nova Scotia, I grew up in Winnipeg, I was born in Saskatchewan. I lived everywhere, man. And I feel like all of this land this land is my land, and I feel connected everywhere I go on this grand land. Yeah, and it's so nice to be in the room with you guys. Like we are this like triumvirate. Like this is this is like generations of Native Earth, generations of Indigenous playwriting. It's kind of cool to be able to be pulled together in a room like this. So thanks to Imago and to Joyce for pulling us together.
Thank you. Thanks to all of you for sharing. So we're here to talk about Indigenous theater practices. And so I suppose I want to start with maybe the most basic but most complicated, perhaps, question. What do we mean when we talk about Indigenous theater practices? What does that phrase mean to you?
I'll go. What the heck? Because I wrote the book on it. Yeah. I wrote a book called Medicine Shows, Indigenous Performance Culture. Because when I was leaving Native Earth in 2011, my very wise and very generous general manager told me I had to write it all down because a lot of it was in my head. And a lot of what was in my head was work that was not being documented, not being remembered, not being reviewed in a lot of cases. I know things have changed since Keith has been there, but back in the day, we couldn't buy a good review. We could rarely buy a bad review. We just couldn't get any attention at all. And so a lot of the work that happened in that time was Turtle Gals Performance Ensemble. That was Jani Lozon and Monique Mojica and Michelle St. John to start. Eventually Phelan, Sherry Miracle came into that group. That was Marie Clemence's work. That was a lot of it was women's work by women. A lot of it was work that was being made, sort of the genealogy of Spider Woman, Muriel Miguel, Lisa Mayo, and Gloria Miguel, who are the oldest Indigenous feminist group on Turtle Island. And they had created a way of making theater that was very devised called story weaving. And Monique and Jani and Michelle had taken that. And then I came to Native Earth and I started working with them. And then I started to learn that. And so my practice changed. I was sort of brought up in traditional Western theater. And then when I came to Native Earth and I was exposed to all of these artists who were making work in a very different way, that changed my practice. And that over my time at Native Earth, I continued to change my practice so that we changed from this model, which is, the director's at the top of the pyramid and everybody's down below trying to guess what the director wants, to tipping it on its side and working in a circle so that everybody brings all of their stuff to the room. And it's a much more collaborative way of working. And every room and every rehearsal hall in the country says that, but they're lying. This kind of work is really hard, making work collaboratively and allowing all the artists to bring all of their ancestors to the room with them. It changes the work. And we three were in Death of a Chief together. Well, yes, we three were in Death of a Chief together. And a lot of that we discovered in that process too, like when we make work in that shape. That's my opening gambit.
Wow.
Boom.
Someone want to jump in?
I will. I think the thing about Indigenous theater practices is that it's a thing that in my experience, continued to change and that had the freedom to change and to morph and to evolve into what we needed it to be as we evolved in the understanding of who we are as people working within it. Because when I met Yvette, when I met Keith, when we began working together, it was a time before I Don't Know More. It was a time before the acronym MMIWG. It was a time before we even talked about two-spirited people in like any sort of common, with any sort of common vernacular. These terms are still pretty new in a lot of ways. The acronyms are still pretty new. So we were coming up in our theater practice as, it's almost like a Turo wampum, not to get, but there's the world that's happening beside us, and then there's the theater that's happening, right? And so these two things cannot not impact each other. And so as the world is happening beside us and we're watching the world witness us in a different way, we are considering how we put ourselves on stage to be witnessed, not just by ourselves, but by that other. And so there has to be an evolution in what we're doing. There has to be an evolution in the way that we do it. And I think that's the thing about Indigenous theater practice, is that there is a permission to do that. And I think that permission has expanded, or at least was more and more, right? So, you know, we build these ways of doing things. We build this framework of like, okay, so how do we work together? Well, we know that, you know, we're going to try and each room is different, right? Each rehearsal process is different. You set a different set of rules and protocols depending on who's in the room, who are you in relationship with, right? And it's not always, just because it's an Indigenous show doesn't mean that it's always Indigenous people. So you figure out how you build that community with people and how you engage with people who come from different nations, who might be non-Indigenous and might have a different, you know, connection to culture, a different way of engaging with that culture. So it's like, so it's everything, right? And it always has to be able to move. And I think for me, the thing that I have always thought about, and the thing that it's always been for me, and the thing that I've carried outside of theater is about the values, right? So there's lots of Indigenous cultures, mostly from out West, have this, they have a set of values. They have a set of working, a way of working, right? So those humility, integrity, courage, all of them.
Generosity.
There's
Wisdom.
You guys were 80s at Native Earth. So
Yeah.
Me, like those aren't traditional to my people, but I always found value, and I still do, in holding on to some of those traditional values. So and 7 is a lot for me to hold. Maybe I'm slacking on my values, but I really try to think about the ones that feel important to me in whatever work that I'm doing, and I try to hold on to them. And so, you know, generosity is huge for me. And I think it's like sort of the most important one in my work, no matter what I'm doing, because generosity can extend into so many spheres and into so many ways of working, right? And that feels really important. So I think this is something that I wrote, in that theater anthology that you put together, Yvette, which is like, in theater school, they tell you, you know, we're just here to give you the toolbox, and you learn what you need, and you take what's important and what works for you. And I think there is something in Indigenous theater methodology and practice that is like, you come together with a group of Indigenous people from all over different nations, and there are valuable pieces in all of those teaching. And so I think it's about taking all of those teachings, however they pertain to you, and however they sit inside of you, and however they work with you. And I feel like we're going to talk about Death of a Chief a lot here, but there's something I've been thinking about a lot lately, because land back is this big terminology that we're all talking about. And I just have this very vivid memory of sitting in a rehearsal hall with a big, you know, one of those big pads of paper, and everybody was writing on it with Sharpies. And it was about, what was our Rome? If we had to envision Rome, what would it look like? Like, what's our perfect existence? And I think so much of that feels like it's tied to the land back movement. It's like, how do we get to exist here in this contemporary way and be contemporary people and drive cars and buy groceries and pay taxes and all of those things, but still get to be who we are in a way that we are, that our existence is centered. Anyway, so I think it's a lot of things and it's a lot of big thoughts, but that's the thing that I think is fantastic about theater, is that I feel like it provided me with a framework to think really far ahead about things like Rome that I've been able to take with me into other work that I do. So I think it always changes. It always has to change, because we're always changing, and our relationship to who we are is always changing.
Wow. I don't know how to follow up.
Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Yeah. Well, thank you both for all the things. I think I feel incredibly grateful to have been at Native Earth at a time when nobody wanted us. And that may sound weird to some people, but I can remember the reviews. I can remember how difficult they were and how devastating they were to the team. We were, if we're going to talk about Death of a Chief as an example, but we're talking about Drury and Izzy as well, because the outcome of what happened at Drury and Izzy, the production of it, and this idea of how the Doors are the Toronto Theatre Awards and how they were set up at the time. And it's a volunteer basis, and volunteers would get the list of the productions that were out. And then, of course, they would all go to the shows they wanted to see at Factory, at Tarragon. They'd want to go to, if Soul Pepper had something on, whatever. And all the small indie companies and culturally diverse companies are at the bottom, and small shows who need that representation and need those accolades more to kind of lift them and to show funders that they deserve more funding. They wouldn't have enough juror members show up to actually be able to vote on it. So you have at an indie jury, you have 15 jurors, 4 would come to a Native Earth show. So you have all those other votes going to other plays that they went to see, because it wasn't what it is right now. And so to know and understand that, and to have experienced, had to been an actor in shows, and to be in the office, and to have us all sit around and be devastated by reviews and by the things that people were saying and by audience numbers that people just weren't coming to our shows. We did a very polite genocide, and it is so relevant to today and to the things that are happening. It is such a good show that Melanie wrote. Couldn't get people, a very polite genocide. I remember us in the room going, well, that title's not going to sell a lot of tickets. And she had this other beautiful, or the woman who fell to earth. And I can remember us going it's just such a good title that won't sell tickets, but we can't not use it. We have to. And to honor the playwright and to put it out there, we did that. But, it wasn't like no one was running to that show, even though it was a really great story, a very well told piece that came out of her experiences working within the medical system and seeing the things that she was seeing with folks in communities in Winnipeg, and then wrote this about the impacts of generational impacts of residential schools that came in a very polite genocide. So to me, it's I experienced all that at a time when, it was a really difficult thing to keep going. You got slammed into the mat, and then you had to get up and dust yourself off and say, no, this is essential work. This is good work. We need to keep doing this. And this means a lot to those artists, and keep moving. And I watch so many artists kind of have to persevere. And then the switch now to where everybody everywhere is getting hired all the time, and everybody is phoning us and saying, I have always thought Native Earth, I've always valued the work of Native Earth, is usually how a conversation starts. And I know that no one came to our shows before. And so I valued them. I mean, I never came to them, but I valued what Native Earth was doing. And I think that's always been I accept and I understand, and I totally think people are being honest with me when they say they value Native Earth. But to value it and then to support it through, bums and seats is something different. And so this whole change in this whole world, that this is going to come and go, and the next thing's going to come along. And so in this time, it's about keeping your feet firmly planted, because some people are going to think the good times are just going to keep rolling. And someone reminded me very recently, he's like, hey, we had this happen before in the 90s. We had a whole thing where all of a sudden we were everywhere and everything, and then it went away. And it was shocking to those artists because they had just come to think that was always going to be there. And so I think it's always good to be reminded. So when we come into those spaces, when we're talking about those things, to me is here's a prime example of the difference of being in two spaces. When you come into first day of rehearsal, it's business first. People get down, they sign contracts. Hi everyone, welcome, this, whatever. Everyone introduce themselves, if you get that. But people jump into their equity contracts, this and whatever. And at Native Earth, it's not like that. It's hey, who are we? Let's stand in a circle. introduce yourself. Where are you from? Who are your people? Where you come from? And that's, you know, we always have mixed folks from all over, not just Indigenous folks, but people who identify from all over the world. We just want to know who they are and where they come from. It's about being in relation. And when I was at the National Arts Center and the Global First Nations Exchange met when the National Arts Center was opening the new wing, they had this huge meeting of international Indigenous artists, and then PACT was there. And the PACT people, so all the mainstream organizations and all that, predominantly white, you know, they all went into a room right beside us, and we all went into another room. And we started with introductions. It took 8 hours just to go through introductions, just for people to introduce who they were, where they come from, you know, all that stuff. And when we came out, the PAC people came out and said, oh, it was great. We got this done, this done, this done, this done, this done. We got everything's done on our list. Like we did the work. And there's how'd it go? And it's like, oh, we didn't do anything. We actually just introduced each other and got to know each other. Like we introduced and got to know each other and breathed in the same room together. And then the next day, the people at PACT went back into that room and introduced themselves because they had a moment like, oh, right. You walk into these rooms and it's business, business, business. We get into the time. And that's the thing I would say about first day. Like, let's break some bread. Let's have some food. Let's share some space. Let's host people. Let's sit and be in space with each other. And Yvette said this, it is hard work to be in that space. I'm not saying we slow down, but it doesn't mean the work is any less, you know, rigorous. It's a different kind of rigor. And to sit and listen and not to be on your phone, not to be like thinking about what the next thing and we're going to do a read and this is whatever and this is our plan. We kind of break that up. We kind of like slow things down. We kind of like be in space and get to know each other. The work will come. And when we get there, we're going to work hard when we get up on our feet or when we start doing table reads, start doing table work. But before we do that, we need to know who's in the room, who we are. I've heard this many times. I've been in spaces with both these women, is that when we arrive somewhere, our spirit eventually arrives with us. It doesn't always come at the same time. And so it allows someone the opportunity to come into a space, to introduce yourself, to, you know, bring your ancestors in, to bring in your full self. You find your feet and also your spirit comes into the room. And it's just like an ease. And then the work is just richer. The relationships are richer, you know, and that is the change, like the turning from the top down to a circle is that we're all just people. We're just introduced as people. And we accept like the traditional principles, the ideas of like, what is empathy and generosity and how do we bring our full selves, doing check-ins and all that stuff is like, we just take care of people. And part of taking care of people is just feeling that you have the time to do it. And the thing I learned at Native Earth through Yvette and Donna Michelle and Phelan and many other peoples that have come through those doors, there are a set of rules that we think we have to follow. And there came a point when Yvette and Donna were like, we don't have to follow those rules. Like, who says we have to? We don't have to. And they would push back on it. They would push back and question, but why? But why? And those are those everyone talks about these colonial structures now. And at the time, we weren't really identifying that, but we were saying, no, we do things differently. We don't have to conform to that. And to me, that's what Jesse Wente calls cultural sovereignty. And he meant, when he said that the first time, it rang in, I was in a room full of people and it rang and everyone was like, oh, that's it. We have autonomy. We have our own way of doing things. And every room is different. People come from all different walks of life and we learn things from new people some people smudge, some people don't. We go in this way in the circle. We go in another way in the circle. We don't do that. We do that. We don't eat before. We eat after. Like all those things, but you don't know that until you start talking to people. And that's all part of it. So I think that is part of that practice.
So much. I don't even know where to go from all of that. I mean, there's so much that I want to ask you about. I mean, I guess maybe just does someone want to jump in? I don't have to ask something.
I know Joyce, you have the chat closed, but somebody's asking about story weaving. I think that, like, if Yvette, if you want to explain what story weaving is.
I can attempt it. I Here's the link to Spider Woman Theater, who is the grandmothers of us all, in New York. Lisa's passed on now, but Gloria and Muriel are still making theater in New York. They started at the beginning. It's very much like a devising process, story weaving. I've been lucky enough to be in the room with Muriel once in a workshop with her. So I actually learned it from Turtle Gals, how they use story weaving, which is like bringing stories together and then pulling pieces from stories, words or images, and then starting to layer those together, which is, I mean, that sounds like devising, but these women have been doing it for a long, long time. And it meant that one of the very freeing things about story weaving for me was they brought in everything. Like when you saw the Scrubbing Project, they sang like Somewhere Over the Rainbow in it. They did vaudeville in it. They brought in everything that was in their toolkits. And some of those women come from circus, like from Wild West show kind of circus. And so that stuff all came into it too. And it was very freeing to not have to be, it's about the white gaze, right? Like not have to be Indigenous, because a lot of what we face in Indigenous theater, especially the time I was at Native Earth, was like beads and buckskin, right? Like that's not very Indigenous. I once did a gig in Germany. I took 3 pieces, 2 monologues and a duet. And we did it for the conference. And someone came up to me afterwards. He was like, that was great, just not very Indigenous. And I was like, right, this is because I didn't do beads and buckskin, because I wore a wedding dress in one piece, you know, because I did wear a ghost shirt in another piece that should have been Indigenous enough for him. But it's that idea of like everything we have, we're allowed to bring to the room, whether that's our circus history or our classical training or our opera singing, and that is a thing about story weaving that's very freeing for me. It's like those women bring everything in and everything is on the table. And then you can start to build your story, whether you're talking about violence against women or you're talking about mother courage, like whatever your source material is, you can bring in all of the things that resonate with your source material. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be Indigenous, whatever that means. Yeah, but it was a huge, I mean, this was part of them going back to Death of a Chief, gang. Like when we did Death of a Chief and we all spoke Shakespeare, like the text, trippingly on the tongue. And people were just like outraged. Why aren't they speaking like Indians, right? And they meant res speak. They wanted us to have adapted Julius Caesar to talk like what they expected Indigenous folks to talk like, which is res speak. And often like what they think is Indigenous is people for whom English is a second language. Well, all of us in Death of a Chief, English is our first language. That's the way it was designed. Like we were all deracinated. We've all been cut off from our languages early. And so English is the common tongue for us. And so why shouldn't we be allowed to work with that language? Because language is power. But no, the audiences were like, why? I thought I was coming to see an Indigenous show and they were just speaking Shakespeare.
Yeah. I want to ask you, Yvette, in your book, Medicine Shows, I'm going to quote you. You write, the residential school system has had such a profound impact on First Nations in this country that it's hardly surprising that Indigenous artists are working out its effects in their theater. Indigenous theater artists make medicine by reconnecting through ceremony, through the act of remembering, through building community, and by negotiating solidarities across communities. I mean, I think, you know, all of what you've been saying really does connect to that what we mean by, you know, making this idea of connecting and community, and and working across communities and togetherness, right? And I guess the question is why do you think theater is such a privileged space in which to grapple with these issues, in which to grapple and heal from the trauma of residential institutions? And this could be for any one of you. It doesn't have to be just for Yvette, because I'm quoting her.
I think for me, because theater is a place, because it's a place of making empathy. Like if you can get someone to watch the story, I'm thinking right now of Almighty Voice and His Wife by the late, great Daniel David Moses, who it's a friggin' brilliant piece of work. The first half is one thing, and the second half is in an industrial school in a 1950s abandoned industrial school, and it's same two characters but in whiteface. It's so brilliant. It's such a brilliant comment on connection and reconnection and medicine. He was way ahead of his time. But the trick of theater is we could watch that and there can be empathy created, and two people are sitting beside each other, completely different experiences of, or know nothing about residential school, and experience that and have some kind of insight into it. It's one of the few places where we can sit beside people who are not like us, see the same thing and experience it differently, and maybe understand a little bit more. And you can't pause it and go and get ice cream out of the freezer. You have to just stay in it.
Yeah, that idea of different audience members. I mean, I love what you just said. Theater is a place of making empathy. I think I'm going to be repeating that over and over and over again. But yeah, this idea.
Can I just jump in on that?
Yeah, go ahead, Keith, please.
I was just going to say, so recently we did a production at the Shaw Festival of my play, and we brought in an elder, Albert Choking, in, and he would come once a week and sit with us in the morning. We'd meet him at 10 and go till 1. And Albert is a residential school survivor. And the play isn't about that, but Albert came and just shared his stories with us and reminded us that it wasn't that long ago that people didn't believe him. And he was able to share that space with us and to be present with us. And so that alone is like finding he's like, I'd never been in a theater before. And he was very sweet and very kind and generous with us. And he did the work because residential schools were in the room. There were people who were survivors and people who were dealing with some stuff. And Albert was able to be present for us. And in that way, those things are of the present, and they are in every Indigenous room that you are in then when you're creating art. And so those things are ever present. How we work with them and how we acknowledge it and work through it is just going to be, that's part of the work we do. The other thing I found is I had so the play is very sad, and a woman told me afterwards, and I think this of all theater, she said, "You gave me the opportunity to cry in public, but privately, because we're all watching something. She's like, my brother committed suicide, and I have always cried at home by myself. I have these moments, I break down, and then I recover, and then and she says, but I could be in public with other people, and other people are crying. Other people are releasing and feeling emotions that they've had to push down. Like someone's like, I'm uncomfortable with you crying because, she said, I could just do it publicly. I could release with other people and be in that space. And that is part of that empathy of allowing someone to just feel emotions with other people, because that energy around you is such an important aspect. And that's with laughter, that's with anger, that's with all those things. We go through so many people deny themselves for whatever social reasons or for whatever situations they're in. They can't feel those things. So when you're in a theater and something on stage happens and you feel a collective anger or a sadness or all that stuff, that to me that's the healing. Telling a good story and making people feel like reaching into the heart and give it a little squeeze. Whew. I've walked away from some theater thinking, I was like, I needed that cry tonight. Like I needed to feel that. Like that was great, and felt like $1 million after. So that to me is a really important aspect of it.
But I also think there's something like people didn't believe him, like about Albert. That's like, I think that little nugget is part of the reason why I think I was drawn to writing for theater. There's a power in writing, no matter what you're writing, but there's an autonomy in theater. We have control in a different way, especially if you are working with a company like Native Earth or, the Turtle Gals. If we were working within our own companies, and we knew these stories to be true, we could tell them. And there was a catharsis in that, and a solidarity and a healing and a comfort. And I think that's why there was this time, for a lot of us that everything feels like, like Daniel's work, or, like a lot of the work that, like when I came out of school and I started working with Native Earth and working with the Turtle Gals, I look at that work as being light years ahead of where a lot of things are now. The things we were saying and the like concepts we were exploring in those days, like we're so huge, like beyond where I think a lot of things are now, because we knew no one was going to I'm going to swear for the first time, no one gave a shit. No one gave a shit about what we were doing, and we didn't give a shit what anyone thought about us. We were just going to put the stories out there in the way that we wanted to. And there was an incredible amount of freedom in being able to express yourself without feeling like you needed to. I feel like something has changed recently where maybe I'm just in a different place now. But I feel like when, like, there was a lot of theater, I don't know, like 15 years ago that we were making together, where we weren't coming to the audience as much as we have to now, or as much as we maybe cared to. We were asking them to come to us. I'm like, you are coming to see the show. We are in relationship. Like, you have to come to us, meet us halfway. Whereas now I think a lot of the time there's this pressure because we want to be believed so badly that we come further than maybe we need to. That's a thing that I have been feeling more and more, where I'm like, okay, I want you to understand what I'm saying. And I want you to believe me. I want you to believe me. Please believe me. This is real. This is real. This is real. That we're coming further and further, and we're not asking for people to come to our stories in the same way. I think that's something that I feel now. Like, I think about the work we were doing with, like, A Very Polite Genocide and Death of a Chief, and Death of a Chief being like, this is going to be our talk, Death of a Chief night. But Death of a Chief was an adaptation of Julius Caesar, with a woman playing Caesar, a male, Lauren Cardinal, Corner Gas fame, playing Calpurnius. We had to add the syllable. It was all, genders were flipped, roles were flipped, because in a lot of our societies, women are the leaders. So it didn't make sense to have a dude, which meant we had to change a lot of the framework of that play. We wore, the costumes are beautiful. We wore hoodies with West Coast designs on them. Everybody's nation was sort of incorporated. There was a lot of button work on some of the costume pieces, ribbons, the four medicine wheels were colored. So we were throwing a lot of things together, but we all knew where they were rooted, and we didn't explain. Nobody wore, leathers and feathers.
The stones. Everyone asked about the stones, right, at the start. Yeah. What are the stones? What do the stones mean? Yeah, but we didn't. There was no explanation in the program about what that was,
and people really, which I loved. People really wanted an explanation, and so I think.
What do the four colors mean?
What do the four colors mean?
Yeah,
and so it's like. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. This is.
No, I was just going to say that there really is. I mean, I've noted as well this tendency of, like, the additional work, I think, that Indigenous plays and Indigenous playwrights and productions need to do, of I don't know, cultural informacy, if we want to call it, of you know, all the education guides, all of the, you know, explanations, the program notes, the links, the, you know, all of the things that we're providing. And you know, I mean, really what you're saying is, you know, we have to come more, we're coming more to the audience, right? And then I'm also thinking about, you know, in your play, Phelan, in Two Indians, with the character of Ro, where she's just so burdened, you know, by the weight of having to do that work, right? And you know, leaves her angry and frustrated, you know, as she says, right? And so, where's that boundary? Like, where, you know, what?
I mean, I don't know. Because I know that, like, I think a lot of the work that I've done and a lot of the writing I've done is that, I want to be undeniable. Like, in whatever I'm writing now, I want to be undeniable, and I of course want to be believed, and I want people to believe what I'm saying, because I want them on side, because we need people to believe us, because our words, we've been yelling in the echo chamber for so long that's only had so much success, and so I want people to believe us, and I believe that there's power in education and telling these stories. But I do feel like theater it's a different kind of place, where we have a different artistic license, and I you know, I want to believe that people who are sitting in the audience can just come with us on those journeys, and that it is changing, and that it's not founded in a place of like attempting to be polite or performing some sort of concept of allyship, but is actually just engaging in good story, like that can drop the artifice of all of the other stuff and just sit in the chair and watch the show and enjoy it, or don't. Like, it just because it's there doesn't mean it's good, and just because it's there doesn't mean it's bad, right? You know, and we all have our own opinions, we all like different kinds of things, it's, you know. And so I'm just like, I want people to engage with the work authentically, in a way, without thinking about all of the other shit, and just enjoying a story or not. And that sounds so simple and like maybe a bit trite, but that's kind of it, where it's just been interesting to be, I think, in the world of theater, and watching it evolve as the world evolves and as things change. Because it's always just been story, right? That's all we've ever been doing, is just telling story and wanting to people to watch the story and enjoy it or don't. But I think maybe try and put the politic of like how you should be watching our story aside, and just enjoy the story.
Keith and I were talking the other day about just appreciation, right? The value of just watching or reading and appreciating, without, you know, I don't know if you want to say more about that, Keith, but, you know, not being critical, just accepting.
Well, that's a Daniel David Moses thing, right? Like, I remember he taught at Queen's, and all his courses were about appreciating Indigenous writers, not critiquing them. He says, we're not at a stage, you don't even know who these people are. You don't know anything about them. You have to learn who they are and appreciate them before any kind of criticism can come forward. He's like, of course, we need that criticism. But he was like, this is your intro to this work. This is your door into this stuff. Because most people ask people to name 5 Indigenous playwrights right now. There are lots of people who would struggle with that and stuff like that. So to me, it was like, right, there comes a point where we need to appreciate these works. Like, and to talk about appreciation, like, Yvette, I don't know if you want to talk about about Almighty Voice and His Wife, about why you brought it back. Like, it is one of my absolute favorite plays. And the idea that when it came out, it was way ahead of its time. It's been taught in universities across the country. It never gets produced. And Yvette was like, I can remember you saying, I was like, we're bringing it back because no one else is going to do it. And it deserves to be done. It should be done as much as the Rez Sisters should be done. But yeah, and so that was brought back for that reason. But that just goes to show, like, I don't even know, like, the Soul Pepper just did a production of it, and I still don't know if audiences are ready for it. Like, to me, like, people understanding what Daniel was saying with it, because it is, to me, is one of the most moving pieces of theater I've ever seen.
Maybe now, like maybe since the air quotes, discovery of the bodies in the residential schools. Like maybe now is the moment, like, but this has been my career. Maybe now,
Yeah.
maybe now they're ready for this play, like any play, any Indigenous play. But for Almighty Voice, like maybe now that there's this moment where it feels like Canadians are like, oh my God, it's like they're ready to be told something. And some of them are asking, like, some of them are like, I didn't know. I don't know how you couldn't know. It's been there in the writing and it's been in the work all this time. But okay, you didn't know. We don't teach it in school. We didn't teach it to me. We all had to go and find it. I'm going to point out this book right now, which is Vera Manuel, Honoring the Strength of Indian Women. Vera's dead, but some brilliant person pulled together all of her works. And this is like Vera was way ahead of everybody else in terms of medicine and theater. She wrote her social work thesis or something on how residential schools were not being acknowledged. And all of these pieces, these little pieces in here are very, talk about appreciating, very new pieces, but no one was writing about them at the time. And she was doing it in circle, doing it like devising it, doing it with people who were not actors, but as ways of healing, as ways of dealing with the issues. And then someone put this book together, like just in the last couple of years, which is like, I'm so glad that it exists, because this is our this is part of our history. These are our ancestors, and Vera never got to see the book.
Wow.
Yeah, this is Indians in Residential School, a study of the breakdown of a culture, submitted in 1987 as an essay for a fourth-year history class by Vera Manuel when she was an undergrad, 1987, talking about residential schools. And she just carried that forward, working with people. I don't know, when are Canadians ready? Like, are they ready now? Is this our moment? Hey, cat. It's not really a Zoom call until you see some cats, but
sorry.
No, it's good.
No, it's good.
All good.
Yeah.
Yeah. People playing Zoom bingo, like you can tick off that square. Yeah, I think that idea of knowing and not knowing, and what people know and don't know. I was reading, Keith, recently your conversation with Lindsay Lachance about, I think it was called Navigating Indigenous Storytelling with Mixed Company. And you talk very specifically about some of those challenges of working in groups that include Indigenous and non-Indigenous artists, and the challenges in rehearsal practices, the challenges in kind of the lack of or the differences in shared cultural knowledge, or the lack of sharing of cultural knowledge, and the challenges of trying to navigate, I think in conversations about knowing and not knowing, what people know and don't know, and the discomfort, I think, that you talk about on both sides of people, from Indigenous communities who, things are coming up for them in the rehearsal practice. And then on the other side, there are, settlers who have no idea what's going on, right? And so it's a true wampum that Phelan talked about at the beginning in a lot of ways, right? So could you say more about that, maybe?
Yeah, I think, every room, right now, there are not enough Indigenous designers. We've had if you look at the last 20, 30 years of post-secondary institutions, and how many Indigenous folks they've trained, it's pretty bad. And I remember, just as a side note, I remember Yvette, when National Theatre School was celebrating its 50th year. It's one of my favorite stories to tell people. They were like, hey, we were wondering if Native Earth can put something like celebrate National Theatre School's 50th anniversary. And Yvette was like, I can do that if you can tell me who has graduated from your program that's Indigenous. And the person on the other line was like, well, and Yvette was like, okay, I'll give you the first one. Alana's king. Okay. Is there anybody else? Do you know? And the person was like, just, maybe we'll get back to you. And then they never called back. But that idea, so when we go into rooms, we pull in designers. It's usually IBPOC folks that, for many, many years, that was the priority. We brought in IBPOC folks that would come into these rooms and design and that. And that's how we have so many great relationships with other companies, because people have moved on and moved to other places. Like I was saying to someone the other day, I was talking to a class, and it was like, Catherine Hernandez, who just won all these awards for her film Scarborough, was head of marketing at Native Earth. Nina Lee Aquino, who's the new artistic director at the National Arts Center, was at marketing, worked with all of us. Richard Lee had done audio, like all these artists and have been in and out of our doors and working together. But everyone comes with a different cultural context and how we do things. And again, we go back to this idea. I've been in rooms where we have a shorthand and everyone understands and knows, and it's such a breath of fresh air. And then you have someone sometimes who you think knows and understands. You've met them. They've been very kind, been gentle, been good people. They're good people. They come in the room and something gets said and they're shook, or they start crying, and you're like, sorry, is everything okay? And they're like, I didn't know. I didn't know this, or I don't know if that's true. Like there's a bit of a bristle sometimes, like, because people are just processing. And then all of a sudden everything has to stop. We have to navigate things. And then, when we did King Lear, there's an all Indigenous cast that did King Lear at the National Arts Center. And there were a bunch of like pelts. They had a bunch of animal pelts and stuff like that. And at one point they wanted someone from Bear Clan to wear a big bear head. And the senior artist was like, absolutely will not do that. I will not touch that. And then other people were going, have you done ceremony, or have you honored these things? Like, have you done the things you need to do to bring these things into the room? And everybody's like, I don't understand. What do you mean? These are just costumes. And so then all these things start kind of happening, and community, people are reaching out to community and trying to figure out how we can do this, how we can do that, and this, whatever, and you're having to compensate. And so sometimes the work that's outside of the work, when you're bringing in these people or when we're intersecting with each other, can get very, very complicated very, very quickly. And so, yeah, I think that has always been part of Native Earth, that's kind of the unknown sometimes of being in rooms, and the work that we have to do outside of that. And sometimes it's education, and sometimes it's education for all of us. Like everyone comes to Native Earth. Like we've had people walk through the front door and go, I know I'm Indigenous, but I know I'm Native, but I don't know what I am. And I have been, colonization worked. I am disconnected. I'm adopted. I don't know anything about anything. And we welcome them in because it's something to find community. And so sometimes it's those people who make mistakes. Sometimes people are new to it. Sometimes people get really excited and they start doing a bunch of things, and an elder, a senior artist or an elder will step in and go, hey, you may not want to do that, and have a talk with someone. And so it's not just non-Indigenous people. You've been in rooms where people are still figuring things out. And that's a part about, we go back to the 7 traditional principles. You have to have the humility to understand. You have to have the generosity and the kindness and the wisdom. Albert Chokin said to me, and he blew my mind because generosity is always been my favorite one. He said, there are the 2 principles I always carry with me, Keith, are respect and forgiveness. He says, and that's how I was able to move through my residential school experience. He said, if I can't respect them, then I have to forgive them. And that's how you move in a good way. And if you can't do either of those, then you have work to do. He says, and every relationship you have has to be that. If you can't respect them, then you have to forgive them from where they are. He says, and that's how we move in a good way. And I was like, and I think about that often when I get angry or frustrated in the last few months. I was like, right, I have to forgive them if I can't respect them. And so that's part about that, just being generous in those rooms, in those spaces. And it's also, taking a step back, taking a breath and coming back in the room. It's also about staying in conversation with people. So yeah. Anybody else?
There's something in what you're saying there. And I think there's I find myself now as, you know, someone who exists, as I think a lot of us have in the last couple of years. The pandemic, don't know, everybody's heard about that. Anyway, but like we've been outside of the room, right? And so the thing that I found about Indigenous theater was that when I got to Toronto, after I graduated school, I was told the thing that a lot of people were at when you graduate from school, which is you'll never work. George Brown, right? Right, Keith? Go Huskies. You were told.
We both graduated there.
We both graduated from George Brown. But the thing is that they fed into you after 3 years of getting your ass handed to you. It was like, well, that was nice. You'll never work. Like they really wanted to pound that into you. And I get why they did that, you know, because it's hard and they wanted you to be ready for hard. But George Brown didn't prepare me for, you know, working in Indigenous theater in community. And so after I came out of school, I found Native Earth. I stumbled into the office and I was like, I'm Indigenous. What can I do? But it embraced me and it gave me a community, a sense of community. And it taught me things. It taught me things about ceremony. It taught me things about protocols. I learned about other Indigenous cultures and about the way that they do things. And I took a lot of those things, like that toolbox I was talking about. You know, I found the things that worked for me when they worked for me, and I let go of other things and I made my own rules to connect to who I am. And I think when you end up in the city, sometimes like I grew up on and off my res of Six Nations. There was no connection to culture there, really. I think colonization, you know, it's a colonial space. Reserves are a colonial space. As I think about just finishing my Quebec taxes for the first time and having to tick a box that said that I didn't live on reserve, so I would not receive a benefit because I didn't stay in the box that they had allotted for me. And that's the thing. So coming to the city from the reserve, the reserve at least held my people. And so I could see myself reflected and I could see a way of life. And when I got to the city, I felt like such an alien, and Native Earth gave me a place to sit and land, and theater gave me a place to connect with culture and spirituality and protocol in a way that I would never have had I not worked in theater. And, you know, theater is medicine, theater is ceremony. Those are the things that we've always talked about. And I think, you know, it's been, I'm grateful. I'm so grateful for everything that I've learned from all of the amazing, smart people that I've got to work with. Because I would not, there's no way I would be where I am without the teachers and the lessons that I learned that theater provided me. Thanks, Yvette. Yvette's the first person who told me to write.
Thank you, Yvette.
I would not have written a word had Yvette not called me and said, hey, we have this writers program at Native Earth. It's called Young Voices. You should write. And I was like, okay. Because I didn't think I was smart enough. You know, I grew up on and off the res, and I never got great grades. I really liked the arts and I went through theater school, but I never felt smart. I never felt smart until I was told to write, and I realized I had stories. And I think that's the thing that I tell everyone. It's not about anything else than telling a good story. And if you can tell a good story, then you're a writer.
Yeah. I want to ask specifically, if you wanted to talk about it, how does the legacy of residential schools inform your work as writers or directors, dramaturgists, actors? I don't know if it's something people want to talk about or not talk about.
I mean, my dog's barking. She wants to talk about it.
Bring her in.
It's like, I mean, I think it's a thing. It's a thing I want to talk about and I don't want to talk about at the same time, because it's still so unraveling. You know, like we think we know. I think I foolishly thought I knew everything to know about my family, and then I got hit over the head with it really hard. Back almost a year ago, when the bodies were found, when the kids were found, and everybody who had been holding it so so close to themselves. All of the family who knew things, who weren't saying things, started saying things. So I found out about people in my family that I didn't know about, and a shoe dropped, and I kind of watched it, like reverberate through my family, and realized I put a bunch of things together. All of a sudden I was like, oh, and that's why, and then because I found out that people in my family had went that I didn't know had gone. I just found out that like my great grandfather was, in servitude essentially after going to residential school. Like, so all of these things are still coming out. And so we've been telling residential, Yvette and I found ourselves in a rehearsal room this past fall where we were working with a bunch of people who were, a bunch of actors, Indigenous actors. And it got really heavy really quick, because we were writing a story. I was writing a play about a residential school survivor. And a lot of people weren't prepared to deal with it in the way that, we had prepared the room in the best way that we could, and had prepared people, we thought, the best way that we could, but they weren't ready. And that's the thing, like you can't ever know when anyone's ready. And so when people had a reaction, we said, it's okay, you can leave if you want to. This isn't our job to traumatize people. And so I think the thing is like we have to be aware of the moment we're in and the work that we're asking people to do. And if they're not ready, then they don't have to do it. And that's fine. And that's the only thing we can ask of people. But a lot of us, I won't speak for the other two Indigenous playwrights here. A lot of us have been working with these stories for years. And so they don't feel new, and it doesn't feel that raw. The thing that's raw is the stuff that's happening in their real life. The telling of the story we've been doing forever. We've been doing it for so long that I think some of us might be bored of telling that story and are looking forward to telling other stories. And I'm looking forward to people being interested. We got a whole treasure chest of pains. But there's so many other stories, like pains and joys, right? We have so many things that there's so many stories that we can share. And so I think, well, this is the moment we're in. There's always going to be moments for us. We're just waiting for the next one to come, right? And I just hope that one is as enticing and interesting and shocking. Yeah.
My residential school's working out is different because my mother was so young, was always learning. So we grew up together. She always said we grew up together and we were learning things together. So she taught me Shakespeare. The first Shakespeare I ever saw was Caesar with my mother. It was on the CBC. It was a broadcast. My mother loved poetry, the power over words. She loved those things. She made me love words in English because that was the language that we had. I mean, she was a polyglot. She spoke Anishinaabe first and then French and then English. But when she died 16 years ago next week, Falen and Keith,
Wow.
she was a master of English. I'm named after a nun. I'm named after Sister Yvette Nolan, who was a nun who protected my mother in residential school, which is great because it means my mother came through residential school not experiencing a bunch of horrible stuff. What it does say, of course, is like, who was my Sister Yvette Nolan not protecting, right? Who was protected and who was not protected. So it's a little bit of a poison apple, right? Education and language and everything that came from the residential school for me. And the way that I honor my mother is by continuing to do work in the world and be functional in the world and be working towards some kind of conciliation with Canadians, because I'm a half-breed. My dad's Irish off the boat. My mom is Algonquin from Quebec. I'm like, my elder is always like, what leg are you standing on, Yvette? Your white leg or your Indigenous leg? So my experience, and in my position at Native Earth for those years was being able to hold that space for all of those different ways of telling those different stories, whether they were about residential school, like A Very Polite Genocide, or Almighty Voice, or whether they were like You Waitin', right? An opera about the railroad going through. Like, yeah, it's that we have so many stories, and some of them are, and there's joy in all of them. I mean, this is the thing, we every time we put on a play, if we ever got noticed, it would be like, and you know what? You would think it would be so heavy, but it was funny. I remember when Phelan's show opened, Salt Baby, her first show, and one of our patrons had come and brought her sister, and she had said, and I told her, okay, it's going to be hard because it's Indigenous theater and you just have to gird your loins, but it's going to be worth it. And then she's like, and then we laughed so hard we peed ourselves, because Salt Baby is very, very funny, as well as being everything. But all of this is true at once, right? Like, our stories are always full of everything. Nothing is disconnected. We tell the stories. Our traumas come with us, but we heal and we have joy and we laugh a lot, and it's body. And we all know this from the Red Sisters.
Yeah, exactly what Yvette said right now is my role as artistic director at Native Earth. We hold, like, there's a responsibility about how you hold space and take care of people. You have lots of young writers and people who want to write these things. And it's about, like, finding the space to sit and talk about, are you ready to tell this story? You know, I've had friends who found out they went to a residential school. Like Phelan says, having the shoe drop, or having that moment of clarity, where some people is like they don't think it's them until it's them. And I've had someone spiral out and call me and say, and these like 1-800 numbers, you know, if you're a survivor and you need to talk to someone right now, I have consistently given that number out. When we do first aid rehearsals, we hold those spaces saying, hey, everybody, if anybody is triggered or anybody, and that is real triggering. That is where physically you see someone, emotionally, there's a moment where it hits them and you see a physical manifestation of those things. And then people come and ask us, want to talk to us about the story. And then it's just about like holding space and talking to them about what stories they want to tell. What is our responsibility to the audience? Because the thing I love about Indigenous artists is that everybody's worried about the audience members and the community members that are going to come and see it. And so you have lots of artists who are doing the work now, like how do we take what's aftercare after a show? How do we make sure people are okay? We had talkbacks after every show just to, you know, in some of our productions, just to, so people have time to sit. You know, Miigwem Fairbrother in his show, he offered like wild blueberries and rice, wild rice, like little things in cups so that people could grab a little bite, a little nourishment, and sit and talk to him after his show. And that was one of the most, not the script, one of the most important things for him was aftercare. And so we talk a lot about that with people, about artists, because some artists are so passionate about wanting to tell their stories. Sometimes they forget the cost that it takes to tell those stories, and the idea that you don't control how an audience is going to react to those stories. So you tell an honest story about something that happened to your grandmother, your mother, your best friend, you, and someone in the audience goes, that's not true. That didn't happen. And all of a sudden someone is having an existential crisis about something that is, or they're in the lobby yelling at somebody or something like that. Or, you know, Albert, I keep going back to Albert, but, you know, the day Williams Lake announced the number of children that had been discovered there, at the Shaw Festival, he entered security, and I would walk, there's a long pathway, and I would meet him every Wednesday morning, and then we'd walk down and I'd tell him what we were doing and what we'd maybe want to talk about today or something. And he had some teachings. He would tell me like, oh, I'd love to do this teaching. I'd love to talk about this. And that day, when I saw Albert, I could tell something was wrong. Like it was physical. And he was just standing in the lobby. And so I went up to him, we started talking, and he was like, I haven't slept. I'm just thinking about all those little boys and girls. Like, I just can't. They're all with me, Keith. They're all with me. He kept saying that. And that day he just sat and we held space for him, because that's what you do. Like, that's an Indigenous space. Like, that's a Native Earth space. There is no, doesn't matter. Like, the plan for the day is out the window, and we just held space and just allowed him that opportunity. But that happens all the time. And so that is part of the role of this, like, community role as an artistic director at Native Earth, as Yvette knows, and Phelan's been in these positions too. Like, so yeah, so to me, is like, that is more the responsibility I feel about these plays right now, is taking care of the people as best we can.
Thank you all of you for sharing that. It's really honest and authentic, and I appreciate you sharing those thoughts with us. We're kind of coming to the end of our time, shockingly, and there's so many more things to say, but I do want to give each of you just a minute to tell us about what you're working now, what you're working on now, what your next thing is that you're excited about, where you see yourself going. I think people will be interested to hear. Who wants to start?
I don't know. I mean, I'm working on a lot of podcasts, which is not unlike theater. Like, it is not unlike theater in terms of writing, which is great. But I feel like we would be remiss not to mention Larry Gunno's play. Like, I feel like that's a good thing to talk about.
Number 7.
Yeah, like I feel like I'm like, it just popped into my head, but it feels like, I don't know, Yvette, if you want to talk about that a bit, just in terms of the theme of you know, some of the stuff we're touching on here. Anyway, I'm working on podcasts.
Yeah, I'm about to, after this call, I have to go back to the park because I'm working on Wakotowin, which in Cree means we are all connected, all my relations. And it's the Theater in the Park show. And yeah, we had 400 children this afternoon for a show. It was the first time we ever had an audience. I do want to acknowledge Larry Gunno's play, Bunk Number 7, because I met him. Larry was an MP, a lawyer. He was part of the Nishka treaty negotiation. He was in residential school. He was the same age as my mother, pretty much. And at the end of his, like, lawyering career, he was working with Marianne Burrop Weston in Terrace. And he's like, I want to write a play. And Marianne brought me up from Toronto to Terrace, and he had 11 pages of prose. And I started working with him. And the play, Bunk Number 7, came along so that we were just about ready to produce it at Native Earth. And then Larry died. And this is the thing about residential school survivors, is like, you're compromised, right? Like, health-wise, there's all kinds of issues that go back. Anyway, Larry died too soon, and we suspended the play because it wasn't finished. But a piece of that will be in the Emigo reading on when we do that reading, whatever that date is. And it's published in Indian Act, which is Donna Michelle St. Bernard built Indian Act. There, Keith has the book. Built the whole anthology around Bunk Number 7 because it never got a professional production. Marianne's been doing a production in the North. I continued working on it, came back to it a few years ago as the living writer to kind of finish it, but not rewrite it, like just make sure it was producible. Yeah, it's like, we're going to do a piece of it at the Emigo event. So thanks, Falen, for bringing Larry into the room.
And just to say, we did a reading, when Indian Act came out, we did a reading of Bunk Number 7. Like, we did an excerpt of it at the festival. It is such a beautiful piece because they are just these innocent boys. And it's funny and it's thoughtful, and the humanity of those kids is so present in that. I highly recommend anyone to read it. And it was submitted as part of Larry's, through the Truth and Reconciliation. It was his submission of his experience of residential school, was his play.
It, yeah, thank you for bringing that in, and I think it's going to be really beautiful to hear part of it at the Gimmigo reading on May 20th. Is the date. Yvette, did you want to say anything else about what you're working on now?
Oh, so many things. You mentioned most of them. Nem Wyatt with Marion Newman, the mezzo, and Ian Cuson, the Métis composer, and Pamela Atarawala. Yeah, I got some things happening in the air. I got a few things going on, including my thesis on governance in theater, my master's. Yeah, that's what I'm working on, or should be. Keith?
Yeah, I'm doing my MA right now at York University, transitioning out of Native Earth, transitioning into Stratford. I'm writing a play about masculinity. I was raised by a single mom and my two sisters, and so I just want to look at what that was, because I have definite crossroads in my life. I had none of the men in my life took any interest in me. All the ladies, all my aunties, all did. I sat around with coffee, knitting, all that stuff, and had a blast with all of them. And all my cousins, most of my cousins are female. So I was like, what is that? What changed? Because I, as a very young boy in small town Northern Ontario, I was homophobic. I can remember saying certain things, feeling certain things, knowing certain things, and how all that changed. And those things didn't come from my mother, So to me, I'm just exploring what that is, what it is to have grown up that way, and what that means to me. So that's kind of what I'm working on right now.
Thanks.
Phelan?
Any final other thoughts?
She's doing podcasts.
She's doing
podcasting.
I'm not even allowed to talk about the other one yet, but it's pretty much out there, so I don't know. But yeah, I'm working on The Secret Life of Canada with my podcast partner, Leah Simone Bowen. And then I'm working on another podcast with CBC. That's the thing that is primarily taking up most of my time these days. Whenever I get to write theater, which I call writing for fun, it's always a joy. And it's so easy. It just feels like breathing again, because I do think it has something to do with that sovereignty that I feel when I'm working in theater, that we we have control over our stories in this space. And I think that's why I gravitated to it, because not just because I'm a control freak, but because it gives us a permission to tell our stories the way that we want to. And we have the backing of community who understand what might seem unconventional to, someone from the outside looking in. But yeah, that's why theater will always be sort of a home for me.
Yeah, it was just some final notes. I mean, I was just, as you were saying that, I was just thinking of Yvette's play Catharsis, the online production, and I'm going to misquote it, so forgive me. But something of what we do is make believe in here becomes belief out there. I don't know what the line is, but something like that, right? And just speaking to the power of theater, that yes, it is a form of play, but it's also it's ceremony, it's community, it's serious, it's storytelling, it's cultivating empathy, it's educating, it's bridging, it's doing all of those things. And then when we go out into the real world, right, we take it with us, and it becomes part of who we are. And it's not just make believe. It's something much stronger and more powerful than that. Yeah. So I guess to conclude, I actually just want to quote Yvette again from. She wrote, "If we're going to move into the time of the eighth fire, we have to go together. That means the non-Indigenous people are going to have to keep reaching out to the Indigenous people. They must risk asking questions that may expose an uncomfortable ignorance. And we are going to have to practice patience, generosity, and humility, and keep answering questions. And if we do not know the answers, we'll have to commit to finding answers together." At the end of Medicine Shows, and I find that so moving. And I hope we've done a little bit of that today. I hope we can continue to do that in the future. we'll definitely continue doing that, thinking collaboratively and collectively about the way forward, but in a different way. On May 20th, in real life, at the National Theatre School. So yes, thank you to the three of you. A wonderful discussion today. I'm honored and awed by everything that you've shared with us. I feel so privileged to have been able to be here with you. And thank you to all of you in the audience for being here and listening. And yeah, I hope to see many of you in person at the National Theatre School on May 20th. And so good night from me. And we'll hopefully see each other in real life soon.
Thanks so much, Joyce.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.